Hello people of YouTube, this is KB38313 here with a video on not so much the couple of firearms I have sitting here, but the shells they take, the shells they use. Basically this is the debate between 12 gauge and 20 gauge, which is superior, which can take more variety of game, which makes the best choice for a youngin, which makes the best choice for somebody, for a seasoned hunter. In my opinion, it's all personal choice. In my opinion, you can't beat either one. I mean, neither one is superior to the other. I think they both have their place, and I like each one for a different task. I'm a firm believer in anything a 12 gauge can take, a 20 gauge can take, and vice versa. Granted that most 20 gauge loads are much lighter than that of a 12 gauge load. Like here's a standard 12 gauge load, just some Remington Dove loads, 1 ounce of lead. Now I'm kind of ignoring the velocity, because velocities on standard game loads for small game and birds really does not vary much from 1200 to 1300. I mean, it stays within 1200 foot per second velocity range, between 12 and 1350, excuse me. So really, feet per second, at least in the way I hunt, is not a big issue. But 1 ounce in there, and in a standard 20 gauge load, I don't know if you can see that, 7/8 ounce. Okay, field loads, excuse me, standards in 20 gauge are like an ounce, but but still, field loads, 1 ounce in a 12, 7/8 in a 20. Okay, so that begs the question, well, obviously 12 gauge has more shot. Okay, but also, both these guns have full chokes on them. That one's a poly choke, but I always keep it set to full choke. This one has just a fixed full choke. Both of these throw the same 30-inch pattern at the yardage that I usually shoot. I never measure it. I just know how far away my average squirrel kill is. It's probably close to 30 yards. But I pattern them, and they both throw the same size pattern. But again, with standard loads, the 20 gauge has fewer pellets in the gaps. But be that as it may, it still has far more than enough pellets to take out a squirrel or a rabbit or a duck, if you had steel shot, obviously. Honestly, in my opinion, I mean, 20 gauge is not superior to a 12 gauge, and a 12 gauge is not superior to a 20 gauge. They are equal. It depends on what you want. Both of them are readily available at just about all sporting goods stores. Both of them are around the same price. Usually they're exactly the same in field loads. You might pay a little bit different in steel shot and waterfowl loads and high brass loads, magnum loads. But something else I wanted to cover. Right here is my basic bird loads. Like I said, I hunt dove with this, and I'll shoot close range with squirrels with that. And by close range, I mean 30 yards or less. 30 to 50 yards is average for squirrel in the late season, and for that, I like 1 1/4 ounces a shot, which is by far the most popular in 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch high brass. This is Remington pheasant loads, but it's just high brass, christened pheasant loads to capture the eye of pheasant hunters. But it also works for rabbits and squirrels and whatnot. But 2 3/4 inch, 1 1/4 ounce, 3 3/4 gram equivalents of powder. Okay. Versus the 1 ounce, so you got a 1/4 ounce, so you got a 1/4 more shot in these than those. So, and then even more than that in the 20 gauge loads. Alright, well, let's take a look at these right here. This Fiocchi, I think that's how you pronounce it. Golden pheasant, again, works for any kind of small game. It's just christened with the pheasant loads to capture the eye of pheasant hunters. 20 gauge, 3-inch magnum. Now, obviously this is all irrelevant if your gun won't cycle a 3-inch, but most 20 gauges manufactured from the 70s up through present were manufactured in 3-inch magnum. But 1 1/4 ounces. That's the same as those other pheasant loads. Number 5 shot, again, those up there were 5 shot. The only difference is those were 1330 velocity. These are 1200 foot per second. So these are much slower. But again, speed doesn't have a lot to do with the killing power. Both of these are, so you get the, I'm not going to say performance, but you get the size load out of a 20 gauge and you do it in a 12 gauge. Granted, these are kind of expensive. I think you'll drop about $20 a box for these. That's out the door, tax and everything. But again, if your gun cycles 3-inch magnums, you can get these. Another good brand of these particular loads or type loads are the Federal Premiums. They are, what do they call them? Prairie Storm, and those are quite a bit more expensive. The list price for these was $17.99. The list price for the Prairie Storms from Federal was $22.99. So, you know, they were both 1200 foot per second velocity, 1 1/4 ounce, number 5 shot. I went with the Fiocchi because it was cheaper. Obviously. Now, to cover the other game abilities, i.e. waterfowl, big game, again, both of them are virtually identical. I'm not going to say virtually identical. What the main problem with most people have with the big game capabilities of a 20 gauge is the foot poundage on slugs. I'm not talking about buckshot, because buckshot is illegal in the state of Tennessee, but as far as slugs, the ballistics on a 20 gauge slug, I think at 100 yards, the foot pounds is like 590, I think. And the recommended minimum for deer is, what is it, 900, I think? 900? It's either 900 or 1,000. One or the other. I'm pretty sure it's 900. Whereas the 12 gauge slug at 100 yards has a 850 foot-pounds, 850 foot-pounds at 100 yards, which is much closer. But when you are hunting with a solid slug that's as big, well, not solid, but it's a cup. You know, it's a kind of a cup shape that's as big around as my thumb. You're not really worried about foot poundage because that mass of the soft lead is what kills the deer, or kills the boar, or kills the elk, or whatever you're shooting at. Because back in the Civil War, and going back to these old conical bullets, the most deadly musket bullets that existed in the mid-1800s, they were basically built like a shotgun slug. They were not hollow, but they were a soft lead bullet that was kind of the shape of, you know, like that. That you would ram down the barrel of a Caplock, what were they, Springfields, I think? But those did not carry a lot of foot poundage. In fact, they were less than 800. But what made them so deadly was the mass and the soft lead. When it hit someone, it caused extensive damage because the bullet actually expanded and exploded if it hit bone. And that would make it the most lethal round in the Civil War, other than the brass cartridges that came out during the Civil War. But and the same concept applies to deer hunting with slugs. Even though you don't have your 900 foot-pounds in a 20 gauge slug, you have mass. You have the sheer mass of that slug, and when it hits that deer, whether it hits bone or muscle tissue, it's going to expand. If it hits bone, it's going to explode, and pieces of shrapnel of lead is going to go everywhere in the deer. And it is going to be an extremely humane kill, and chances are that deer is not going to run any. It's going to drop. So, really, 20 gauges are really underestimated as big game guns. Really underestimated, in my opinion. Now we're going to briefly cover the subject of waterfowl with 20 gauges versus 12 gauges. The loads that I can find of 20 gauge steel shot waterfowl loads, actually made to be waterfowl loads, come in 2 3/4 inch and 3 inch, which are the only two sizes that are manufactured for 20 gauge guns. There are no 3.5 inch Magnum 20 gauge. However, I think they should come out with one. The 3 inch loads that I've seen are available in 3 shot sizes, all of them steel shot, obviously, 2s, 4s, and 6s, which in my opinion, a number 2 shot is about your most versatile waterfowl load you can buy. And the 3 inch 20 gauge, I forgot how many pellets is in there, but it's quite a few. And it'll be plenty for pass shooting ducks, over decoys at ducks, jump shooting ducks, over decoys with geese, When I say over decoys, so you get them in close. And then the 2 3/4 inch loads, I've only seen 2 different ones, 2 different shot sizes, 4s and 6s. And those are more for your over decoys with teals and smaller ducks, you know. I'm sure you can take a mallard with it, but again, over decoy, that's the main word. You wouldn't want to pass shoot with something that's that light of a load. But, like I said, everything's going to work. I mean, anything a 20 gauge can take, a 12 gauge can take, and vice versa. Now, my personal preference is a 20 gauge. Reason? Most 20 gauge guns are made lighter than 12 gauge guns. Obviously, because it requires less steel on the barrel because it's a smaller bore. And these 2 guns in particular, that one's kind of front heavy because obviously you have the tubular magazine and the poly choke up there than this one. Whereas this one's much lighter and most of the weight is concentrated here instead of here. So it's much more comfortable to carry afield. But, like I said, it's all personal preference. If you like a 12 gauge, you like a 12 gauge. I'm not going to criticize you for it. I've heard of a lot of people just sticking with a 12 gauge just because they don't want people to think they're a weenie and have to shoot 20 gauges. People know, the people I hunt with know that I'm not afraid of recoil. I find it an adrenaline rush. But like I said, either of these guns can take the same number of game, same type of game, anywhere. I guess that's it. Feel free to share your opinions in the comment box. I want to hear everybody's opinions on this. I guess that's it. Please comment, please subscribe, and always, God bless.